What happens when a Hollywood legend, a man whose name has echoed across decades of cinema history, walks into a brightly lit television studio expecting a routine promotional appearance, only to find himself facing a host whose questions feel less like conversation and more like confrontation? That was the charged atmosphere surrounding Richard Gere's appearance opposite Joy Behar, in what would soon become one of the most talked about exchanges in daytime television history. What was scheduled as a standard stop on a publicity tour quickly transformed into a tense, uncomfortable, and ultimately explosive moment that viewers would replay, debate, and dissect for days afterward. Before we step fully into the unfolding drama, imagine the setting, the familiar stage of The View, a program known for its spirited discussions, sharp political commentary, and candid celebrity interviews. The show has long thrived on its mix of personalities and perspectives, and at the center of many heated debates sits co-host Joy Behar, known for her quick wit, unapologetic opinions, and willingness to challenge her guests. Across the table that morning was Richard Gere, a Hollywood icon whose career spans generations and whose calm demeanor has often defined his public persona. The morning began like any other inside the bustling studio. Producers moved briskly behind the scenes, adjusting lighting, reviewing cue cards, and coordinating last-minute details. The audience filtered in, chatting excitedly as they took their seats, unaware that they were about to witness a moment that would ripple far beyond the studio walls. Richard Gere arrived early, stepping out of his car with his trademark composed presence, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit that reflected both elegance and restraint. He greeted staff members politely, shaking hands and offering warm smiles. For a man who had navigated decades of press tours, red carpets, and award shows, this appearance seemed routine. Another stop to promote his latest film, another opportunity to connect with viewers. Backstage, Gere reviewed a few notes about his new project. The film, a deeply personal and socially conscious drama, had already sparked thoughtful conversations in early screenings. He expected the interview to follow a familiar rhythm, light banter about his career, a few questions about the film's themes, perhaps a nostalgic reflection on his earlier roles, and then a graceful farewell. Over the years, he had mastered the art of the televised interview, listening carefully, responding thoughtfully, and steering the conversation back to the project at hand whenever it drifted too far afield. Meanwhile, on set, the co-hosts prepared in their usual fashion. Makeup artists made final touch-ups. Producers whispered reminders about timing and segment transitions. Joy Behar, seated confidently at the table, flipped through her notes with a subtle, knowing expression. Known for her sharp humor and direct questioning style, she rarely shied away from controversial topics. For some guests, her approach created compelling television. For others, it felt uncomfortably probing. As the show went live, the familiar theme music played and applause filled the studio. The hosts greeted the audience with practiced enthusiasm. Before transitioning to the much-anticipated interview segment, Richard Gere walked out to warm applause. Acknowledging the crowd with a modest wave, he took his seat, exchanging pleasantries with the panel. At first, the conversation unfolded smoothly. There were smiles, light jokes, and brief reflections on his long and storied career. Viewers at home likely assumed this would be yet another polished, professional exchange between seasoned media figures. But beneath the surface, subtle shifts began to emerge. Joy's questions, while initially framed around the film, gradually adopted a sharper edge. She steered the conversation toward more controversial aspects of Gere's public life, his activism, his outspoken political views, and moments from his past that had sparked debate. The tone in the studio changed almost imperceptibly at first. Laughter became less frequent. Gere's posture grew slightly more rigid. His answers remained composed, but there was a noticeable firmness in his voice. The audience sensed the tension. Cameras captured fleeting expressions, raised eyebrows, tightened smiles. Quick glances exchanged among the co-hosts. What had begun as a routine promotional appearance was evolving into something far more charged. Joy pressed further, framing her questions in a way that some might interpret as challenging accountability. While others might see as confrontational, Gere responded thoughtfully, attempting to clarify his positions without escalating the situation. For viewers, the dynamic was compelling. Here was a Hollywood legend accustomed to admiration and respectful interviews, now navigating pointed inquiries in real time. And across from him sat a veteran television personality unafraid to push boundaries in pursuit of candid answers. The clash was not loud or chaotic at first. It simmered an undercurrent of tension beneath the polished surface of daytime television. Behind the scenes, producers monitored the exchange closely. Live television offers little room for correction. Every pause, every inflection, every subtle shift in body language becomes part of the narrative. Social media reactions began surfacing almost instantly, with viewers debating whether Joy was simply doing her job as a journalist or deliberately trying to provoke a reaction. Others praised Gere's composure, noting how he maintained a calm and measured tone despite increasingly pointed questions. As the segment continued, it became clear that this would not be remembered as a typical celebrity appearance. The atmosphere in the studio felt heavier. Applause at the end of certain remarks sounded more tentative. Even the transitions between questions carried an edge that had not been present at the beginning. What was intended as a friendly platform to promote a new film had shifted into a high-stakes exchange about principles, public perception, and the role of celebrities in political discourse. When the interview finally concluded, both participants maintained professional decorum. There was no dramatic walk-off, no shouting match, just a palpable sense that something significant had occurred. Gere thanked the hosts, offered a final polite smile, and exited the stage. Yet the energy in the room lingered, charged and unresolved. In the hours that followed, clips from the interview circulated widely online. Commentators weighed in, dissecting tone, intent, and impact. Some viewers applauded Joy Behar for asking tough questions and refusing to offer a purely promotional platform. Others criticized her approach as unnecessarily adversarial. Many admired Richard Gere for remaining composed under pressure, viewing his calm demeanor as a testament to his experience and professionalism. What began as a routine morning at The View had transformed into a defining television moment, an illustration of how quickly the balance between entertainment and confrontation can shift. It served as a reminder that live interviews carry an unpredictability that no amount of preparation can entirely eliminate. When strong personalities meet under the glare of studio lights, even the most ordinary setting can become the stage for something unforgettable. And so, what truly happens when a Hollywood legend sits down expecting a friendly conversation but encounters a host determined to challenge him? Sometimes you get more than an interview. You get a moment that reveals the delicate tension between fame and accountability, performance and authenticity, control and spontaneity. You get television that feels less scripted and more real, raw, uncomfortable, and impossible to ignore. The makeup artist moved with quiet precision, dabbing a final layer of powder across his forehead and adjusting the lighting reflection along his cheekbones under the bright studio lights. Even the smallest detail mattered. He sat still, patient, and composed, accustomed to this ritual that had preceded hundreds of interviews over the course of his long career. In his hands were neatly ranged talking points, brief notes about his latest film, a few reminders about key themes he wanted to highlight, and bullet points referencing the charitable initiative tied to the project's release. He read through them carefully, occasionally underlining a phrase with his pen, mentally rehearsing how he would pivot certain questions back toward the film's central message. To him, this was preparation for a routine conversation, another measured, professional exchange on a daytime talk show known for lively but generally controlled discussions. The backstage area buzzed with the familiar rhythm of live television production. Producers whispered into headsets, assistants hurried down narrow corridors with clipboards, and technicians checked camera angles one last time. The faint hum of studio equipment blended with the low murmur of audience members filtering into their seats beyond the curtain. Everything felt structured, predictable, almost mechanical in its efficiency. There was no visible sign that the segment ahead would carry any unusual weight. Unaware of the verbal battlefield that was quietly forming, he took a sip of water and adjusted his cufflinks. He had done this countless times before award show interviews, late-night appearances, press junkets in cities around the world. His calm demeanor was not forced. It was earned through decades of experience navigating questions both flattering and confrontational. He expected curiosity about his career longevity, light humor about aging in Hollywood, and perhaps a thoughtful exchange about the social themes embedded in his new film. Nothing about the morning suggested a storm. Then Joy Behar entered the backstage corridor with her signature confident stride. She carried herself with the ease of someone who had commanded live television for years. Her presence was typically accompanied by sharp humor and quick remarks that kept both colleagues and guests alert, but that morning something felt subtly different. The usual light banter she shared with crew members was noticeably absent. Instead of exchanging playful greetings, she offered short nods and brisk acknowledgments, her focus fixed ahead. Sources backstage would later reveal that the atmosphere had been tense even before the cameras began rolling. There had reportedly been heated discussions between Joy and the producers about the direction of the show, about ratings pressures, about maintaining the program's edge, about ensuring that interviews did not drift into overly safe promotional territory. Daytime television, especially on a program as politically and culturally outspoken as The View, thrives on dynamic exchanges. Controversy often fuels conversation, and conversation fuels viewership. That morning, it seemed clear that Joy was determined not to let the segment slip into predictable pleasantries. As she reached the set and took her seat at the familiar round table, she placed her stack of notes down with deliberate force. The papers made a sharper sound than usual against the polished surface. She began shuffling through them with visible intensity, scanning certain lines repeatedly, circling phrases, underlining points. Her brow furrowed slightly as if rehearsing arguments internally. A few crew members exchanged uneasy glances. They had worked with her long enough to recognize subtle shifts in her mood. The confident energy remained, but it was charged tighter, more focused, less playful. One production assistant quietly adjusted a microphone near her collar, while another confirmed timing cues. Joy barely looked up, absorbed in her preparation. The difference wasn't dramatic enough for the audience to detect, but backstage, seasoned staff could sense the tension humming just beneath the surface. Live television leaves little room for missteps, and when a host appears especially driven, it often signals that the upcoming exchange may veer into deeper territory. Meanwhile, he remained in his dressing area, finishing his review of talking points. A staff member signaled that it was time to move toward the stage entrance. He stood, smoothed the front of his jacket, and offered a polite thank you to the makeup artist. His expression reflected quiet confidence, no sign of apprehension, no expectation of conflict. To him, this was another opportunity to share his work and connect with viewers. As the opening theme music echoed through the studio and the applause light flashed on, the show began with its customary structure. The hosts greeted the audience warmly, exchanged slight jokes about current headlines, and moved seamlessly through the introductory segment. Laughter rippled across the studio, and for a moment, everything appeared entirely normal. The tone was familiar, casual, conversational, welcoming. But behind the practiced smiles and polished greetings, a subtle undercurrent lingered. Joy's posture at the table was upright, almost rigid. She listened to her co-hosts with narrowed focus, occasionally glancing at her notes as though mentally mapping the path she intended to take. Once the interview began, when his name was finally introduced, applause swelled and he walked onto the set with gracious composure, greeting each host in turn. The initial pleasantries unfolded exactly as expected, compliments about his long career, like commentary about his latest role, a brief exchange of humor to warm the audience. The cameras captured friendly smiles and nods to viewers at home. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Yet those seated close to the stage could sense a slight tightness in the air and anticipation that extended beyond routine curiosity. Joy's eyes remained sharp as she listened to his early responses. She flipped a page in her notes slowly, deliberately, as if marking the moment when the conversation would pivot. The crew member standing off camera watched attentively, aware that the true direction of the interview would soon reveal itself. What had begun as a standard promotional appearance was poised on the edge of something more complex. The makeup touch-ups, the careful preparation, the backstage debates, all of it formed the quiet prelude to a conversation that would test composure and redefine expectations. The show had started with standard pleasantries, but beneath the surface, tension simmered, waiting for the precise moment when polite conversation would give way to something far more intense. The conversation began exactly the way seasoned viewers of The View would expect. The atmosphere felt warm, almost effortless. The hosts exchanged light laughter with their guest, and Richard spoke comfortably about his latest film, sharing amusing anecdotes from the set, praising his co-stars for their dedication, and reflecting on the challenges of shooting in unpredictable weather conditions. He described the camaraderie among the cast, the director's unique vision, and the way certain scenes had evolved through collaboration, rather than strict adherence to the script. The audience responded with polite laughter at humorous moments, and appreciative murmurs when he spoke passionately about the art of storytelling. It seemed like a textbook promotional interview, balanced, respectful, and engaging. Joy Behar listened closely, occasionally interjecting with quick-witted remarks that drew smiles from both Richard and the crowd. At first, her tone remained playful. She asked about on-screen chemistry, about whether romantic scenes ever felt awkward, and about how he managed to maintain emotional authenticity after decades in the industry. Richard answered with practiced ease. Years of experience had taught him how to navigate these questions, how to reveal just enough vulnerability to appear sincere while keeping the conversation comfortably within professional boundaries. But then something shifted. Joy leaned forward slightly, her posture changing almost imperceptibly at first. The playful sparkle in her expression dimmed, replaced by a sharper intensity. The studio lights reflected off the polished surface of the table as she placed her hands firmly in front of her, signaling a pivot in tone. The friendly rhythm that had carried the conversation began to slow. "Richard, I have to ask about something that's been bothering me," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the lingering warmth in the room. The change was immediate. The audience's scattered murmurs faded into attentive silence. Even members of the production crew seemed to sense the shift. One camera operator adjusted his stance, but then held still, as though unwilling to disrupt. The fragile tension settling over the set, Richard's expression remained composed, though his smile softened into a neutral line. He had faced difficult questions before about politics, activism, career missteps, but this felt more personal. In tone, still, he nodded politely, signaling her to continue. "You've made a career as the romantic lead," Joy went on, her gaze steady. "Don't you think it's time to acknowledge that maybe those days are behind you?" The words hung in the air like a sudden drop in temperature. For a brief moment, the studio felt suspended in silence. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A faint rustle of clothing could be heard, amplified by the stillness. The question wasn't framed as curiosity, it carried an unmistakable edge. It wasn't about the film's themes or artistic choices, it was about him, his age, his relevance. Richard's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, so brief that casual viewers might have missed it, but long enough for those watching closely to register the sting. Yet decades in the public eye had honed his ability to recover swiftly. He straightened slightly in his chair, folded his hands calmly, and replied in a measured tone. "I'm sorry, Joy, I'm not sure I understand," he said, his voice even but tinged with a subtle firmness that hadn't been present before. Joy leaned back in her chair, a faint smirk playing at the corner of her mouth. The shift in body language was unmistakable. She appeared confident, almost daring him to challenge the premise of her question. "Come on, Richard," she continued, "you're not getting any younger. Isn't it a little ridiculous for a man your age to keep playing romantic leads opposite women half your age? Don't you think audiences are tired of the same formula?" A quiet gasp rippled through parts of the audience. The bluntness of the statement removed any lingering ambiguity about intent. What had begun as a pleasant discussion about filmmaking now felt like a public cross-examination. The camera zoomed in slightly, capturing Richard's reaction in close detail. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his posture remained dignified. He had built a career not only on charm, but on composure. And that composure was now being tested under bright studio lights. For a few seconds, he didn't answer. The silence stretched thin, heavy with anticipation. The tension was no longer subtle, it was palpable. Even the co-hosts seemed uncertain whether to interject or allow the exchange to unfold. When Richard finally spoke, his voice remained calm, though there was a new clarity in it, a deliberate precision in each word. I think storytelling doesn't have an expiration date. He began carefully, and neither does love. The audience exhaled collectively, sensing that he had chosen not to respond with defensiveness, but with perspective. Yet the edge in the air remained. Joy's question had pierced beyond professional territory into something more personal, challenging. Not just a casting pattern, but the broader narrative of aging in Hollywood. The moment underscored a tension that has long existed in the entertainment industry. The scrutiny of aging actors, the double standards applied to men and women, and the public's evolving expectations about representation on screen. But in that studio, it felt less like a cultural debate and more like a direct confrontation. Joy maintained her steady gaze, clearly prepared to push further if necessary. Richard, meanwhile, appeared resolute, determined not to let irritation overshadow his professionalism. The friendly atmosphere that had opened the segment was gone, replaced by an electric stillness that made every word carry extra weight.